welcome to this masterclass brought to you by The Banker magazine. My name is Michelle Price. I'm business editor of The Banker, and I'm joined here today by Philippe Chambadal, who is the CEO of SmartStream, a provider of post-trade processing solutions. And today we're talking about the various issues confronting back offices globally, especially the issues relating to improving efficiency, reducing operational risk, and generally reducing costs. So, Philippe, let's start with the obvious question. What lessons do you think the crisis has given to these back offices globally?
Well, a number of lessons. I mean, the first one, obviously, financial services has got a huge IT spend, but the crisis has highlighted that the IT spend didn't quite work, and some of the business processes had to be retooled, especially on the post-trade processing side. The other aspect is that the risk controls in place were also lacking, and it was impossible for the system to isolate problem banks, and that also calls for new regulations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me a little bit about exactly who are the culprits in terms of regulators. So I think from the point of view of someone like me, for example, it's sometimes difficult to identify which regulators are exerting which type of pressure and on whom they're exerting it. So geographically speaking, is the Fed as irate as the European Commission, for example? What's your view geographically speaking?
Well, I mean, the FSA is certainly very active. They pushed new regulations in terms of cash management and liquidity management, and I think benefiting the industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. And the Fed is also seeking to introduce similar rules. At the same time, ECB is pushing very hard for new initiatives in terms of managing the reference.
The ECB, the yes. European Central Bank, okay.
In terms of managing the reference data, which is a huge problem for the industry.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the FSA. One of the big things they've actually come out with recently are the liquidity risk requirements, which I think is probably the first sort of tangible piece of regulation that we've seen since the crisis. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the liquidity risk requirements will affect the post-trade environment?
Well, IT Group has come up with a study saying that 75% of the banks do not have appropriate tools to manage intraday cash, and the new rules are going to push for retooling in terms of liquidity risk, and that also impacts the back office post-trade processing tools.
And is there any other regulation in the pipeline, or that you can foresee that will have a direct impact on the back office, or is it more kind of indirect impact?
I think the regulators are going to push for STP again. I mean, STP was a bad word. It's become very, very topical buzzword. I think everybody needs to go towards STP. There's no excuse to take 3 days or 3 weeks to sort out a trade. Mm-hmm. Everything needs to be sorted out intraday.
Mm-hmm. STP, straight through processing. Why was it a bad word?
Well, there was an effort a few years ago where the industry tried to get together and create a GSTPA to sort out the issues, and unfortunately the effort failed. This time it cannot fail because the banks cannot afford to get more efficient.
Mm-hmm. So if you're a regulator and you're going to the banks and you're saying, guys, I want to see improvements, what exactly are you looking for? What are the key performance indicators, and what do the back offices need to think about?
Well, the first one is the straight-through processing rate. I mean, if you're 85% or 90% of throughput, you obviously have a major problem. And it also depends on the asset classes. I mean, for US equities, I mean, banks have very, very high throughput, usually in the high 90s. If you look at OTC products, especially in a cross-border, you have throughput of around 70% through the industry. And the issues there are mostly twofold. One is issues of matching or reference data on the instrument definitions. Second one, the percentage of process done by hand. In the OTC world, you have half processes in the back office done by hand, and that's clearly unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned OTC products there. In terms of instrument type, presumably as traders innovate and create new different types of trades and instruments, the post-trade process also becomes more complicated. In your view, are there any particular areas that are more complex and problematic than others?
Well, I mean, highly structured products that require a couple of months of definition and 500-page contract will obviously never been modeled properly. But the bulk of OTC products can be modeled if they were a single standard across all asset classes. And that's where I think the FSA efforts on the Fed and the ECB are going to push for the creation of such a standard.
Mm-hmm. So what are the risks? You said earlier we can't fail. What are the risks if the back offices don't pull their socks up?
Well, I mean, the costs have risen in the last 10 years. I mean, the ratio of front office to back office has gone the wrong way. It used to be 1 person in the front office and half a person in the back office. Now the ratio is 1 person in the front office for 1.5 person in the back office. So as the costs have risen dramatically, the banks just cannot afford to run this rising high costs.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the regulators. Is there anybody else, any other parties that are exerting pressure on the bank's back offices? For example, I mean, presumably on the client side, is there more interest in, they're not just worried about execution quality, but also about how the other elements of the trade are dealt with as well?
No question. I mean, client service is very, very important. I mean, some of the large hedge funds have decided to, actually pre-crisis, to calibrate the size of the trades according to how good the counterparties, the counterpart back office is. And that's the essence of the problem. You're only as good as your counterparties' systems. Mm-hmm. So the hedge funds are putting tremendous pressure on the prime brokers and the custodians to improve their throughput rates and their client service.